Sandra always believed that certain people enter your life quietly, without demanding anything, and leave an impression deeper than the loudest memories. She learned this truth slowly, through small moments that found her at unexpected times, and through experiences that taught her that respect and humility can be more powerful than any grand gesture. What she never expected was that Keanu would become the center of one of those moments, long before the world ever guessed there might be something special between them. She trusted him in a way that she could not fully explain, not because of romantic tension or public fantasy, but because of an incident that stayed hidden, wrapped inside her heart, carrying more weight than most people would ever imagine. She remembered the day as if it had happened yesterday, even though many years had passed. It was early in her career, one of those chaotic seasons when everything moved too fast, and every person around her seemed to carry expectations she felt too young to carry. She was still learning how to handle fame, still trying to understand who she was beneath the pressure of interviews, deadlines, long filming schedules, and unavoidable rumors that followed her everywhere. That morning was supposed to be simple, a quick rehearsal for a scene, a meeting with a director, and then a short break before the real filming began. But something unexpected happened, something small from the outside, but large enough inside her to shift the way she saw people forever. The studio hallway had been unusually crowded that morning, filled with crew members rushing with equipment, assistants organizing scripts, and makeup artists carrying their kits from one side to the other. Sandra walked quietly, half awake, half focused, trying not to bump into anyone. She was used to the noise, used to the pace, but that morning she felt drained, as if her emotions had been worn thin from weeks of pushing herself too hard. Inside her chest, there was a heaviness she tried to ignore, a quiet exhaustion she didn't want anyone to notice. People saw her smile on camera and believed that everything behind her eyes must be warm and solid, but she knew how easily a smile could hide worry and how quickly a laugh could disguise fear. As she walked to the rehearsal room, she heard voices around the corner. At first, she didn't pay attention, assuming it was just another conversation between crew members. But then she listened more closely, and the words struck her differently. The voices were talking about her, mentioning her name in a tone that felt dismissive, mocking, almost cruel. She stood still, not because she wanted to eavesdrop, but because the words froze her in place. They were not attacking her work or her performance. They were speaking about her personal life, her insecurities, and the fears she had never shared publicly. She did not understand how they knew those things, but the fact that they were being discussed so carelessly made her chest tighten. She did not want to confront them or start a conflict. She simply wanted to disappear for a moment, to breathe without feeling seen. She turned away, ready to walk in the opposite direction, hoping to find a corner where she could reset herself before rehearsal. But before she could take 2 steps, she heard another voice enter the conversation, firm but gentle, calm but unmistakably protective. She recognized the voice instantly, even though the hallway separated them. It was Keanu. She remembered how he spoke, not angrily, not forcefully, but with a steady conviction that quieted the air around him. He didn't raise his voice or humiliate anyone. He simply asked them a question that softened the entire moment. He asked why they felt the need to speak about someone who worked hard, who treated people with kindness, and who never harmed anyone. He didn't accuse them. He didn't attack them. He spoke in a way that reminded everyone listening that respect was something too important to throw away casually. His tone carried a warmth that felt almost out of place in a conversation filled with coldness. The hallway suddenly felt quieter, as if the walls were listening too. The people who had been speaking tried to defend their comments with awkward excuses, but Keanu didn't accept any justification. He remained steady, reminding them gently that every person in the building was human, that every person carried struggles no one else could see, and that speaking behind someone's back only revealed a lack of empathy, not truth. He didn't know that Sandra was standing there listening. He didn't know she had heard every word he said, and he didn't speak to earn her gratitude or admiration. He didn't do it for attention or approval. He did it because he believed in treating people with dignity, even when they were not present. That was the part that stayed with her, the part that touched her more deeply than anything else. It wasn't a dramatic scene or a grand, heroic moment. It was a small act of integrity, performed quietly, with no audience and no intention of reward. When the group fell silent, Keanu walked away calmly, his footsteps steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. He didn't know she had been around the corner, frozen in place, trying to process what she had heard. She waited for him to leave before she moved, giving herself a moment to breathe through the mixture of shame, relief, and unexpected gratitude she felt. She wasn't ashamed of herself. She felt ashamed that she had believed she was alone in that moment, when in reality, someone had been willing to stand up for her without hesitation. Later that day, she saw him again during rehearsal. He greeted her with his usual gentle nod and quiet smile, as if the morning had been completely ordinary. He didn't bring up what happened. He didn't hint that he had defended her. He didn't act like someone who wanted credit, and that was what made the moment even more meaningful to her. He treated her with the same respect he always did, never letting her feel that she owed him anything, never making her feel like he did something extraordinary. She wanted to thank him, but every time she tried to approach him, the right words slipped away from her. She didn't want to make the situation awkward or emotional. She didn't want to turn a private gesture into a dramatic moment. But she also knew that she couldn't keep the gratitude buried inside her forever. Eventually, after hours of filming and multiple takes, she gathered the courage to speak to him. They were standing near a stack of equipment boxes, waiting for the next setup to be arranged. The rest of the crew was busy adjusting the lights and camera, leaving them a small pocket of silence in the chaos. She stepped closer, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her heart raced more than she expected. She thanked him softly, in a voice she hoped didn't reveal how much the moment had meant to her. She kept her words simple, telling him that she appreciated what he did, even though she hadn't meant to overhear the conversation. She expected him to dismiss it, to pretend it wasn't important, or to make a joke to lighten the mood. But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, he looked at her with a calm kindness that made her feel grounded. He told her that she didn't need to thank him, because what he said wasn't meant as a favor or a gesture. He said he believed that people deserved to be treated with care, and that if someone spoke unfairly about her, then staying silent would have been the wrong choice. He told her that he didn't think his words had been special, only necessary. And something inside her shifted. She felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of calm that softened the turbulence she carried every day. She realized that trust sometimes grows from the smallest seeds, planted quietly by someone who understands the value of humanity. She didn't know how to explain the feeling, but she knew that something lasting had been formed in that moment. She respected him before, but now she trusted him in a way she didn't trust most people in the industry. She knew he wouldn't betray her. She knew he wouldn't spread rumors. She knew he wouldn't use private information for attention. What she didn't know was that this moment would become the foundation of a deeper connection between them, one that would shape the way she saw him for years. She didn't predict the memories they would create later, the conversations they would share, or the unexpected twists their story would take. She only knew that something had begun, something gentle, something honest, something that felt rare. And she had no idea that the next day would test that trust in a way she never imagined. Sandra woke up early the next morning, hoping that the heaviness she carried the previous day would fade with a good night's sleep. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she realized the tiredness was still present in her eyes. Filming had been long, emotionally demanding, and mentally draining. And although she appreciated the kindness Keanu had shown her, she also knew that the industry had a way of exhausting even the strongest spirits. She took a deep breath, tied her hair back, and tried to prepare herself for another day that would probably stretch longer than she wanted. She reminded herself to stay focused, to stay calm, and to keep her emotions under control. When she arrived at the studio, the atmosphere felt different. There was an unusual tightness in the air, a tension that seemed to ripple through the crew. People were whispering quietly, walking faster than usual, carrying equipment with rushed, nervous movements. Sandra sensed immediately that something unexpected had happened, something big enough to shift the tone of the entire set. She greeted a few crew members politely, but they barely had time to respond before rushing back into their tasks. She felt a growing curiosity mixed with a faint worry she couldn't fully explain. As she entered the main hallway, she noticed a cluster of people gathered around the notice board near the production office. Some looked confused, some frustrated, and others visibly stressed. It was unusual to see that many people crowded there so early in the morning, and Sandra hesitated for a moment before walking closer. She didn't want to involve herself in unnecessary panic, but she also knew she couldn't stay in the dark while something clearly affected the entire team. When she reached the edge of the group, she saw several printed sheets pinned to the board, some slightly ripped from people's hands, grabbing them too quickly. The papers listed unexpected rescheduling decisions, shifts in the shooting order, last-minute changes in the script, and new time blocks that didn't align with the previous day's plan. The production had been altered dramatically overnight, and no one had been informed ahead of time. Sandra frowned as she scanned the pages, feeling her stomach tighten. Sudden changes weren't uncommon in filmmaking, but these adjustments were too extreme, too chaotic, and too disorganized to be normal. Something had gone wrong behind the scenes, something serious. A crew member standing near her whispered to another person that a disagreement had taken place between two producers the previous evening. Apparently, the conflict escalated to the point where one of them stormed out, leaving the rest of the team scrambling to fix the schedule without clear direction. Deadlines were threatened, budgets were misaligned, and no one knew who was in charge of the next phase of shooting. Sandra felt a wave of frustration wash over her. Chaotic schedules meant longer hours, more pressure, and potential emotional burnout. She already felt fragile from the previous day's incident, and now the environment around her seemed even more unstable. She didn't want to lose her composure, but inside her chest, a quiet anxiety began to grow again. She turned around slowly, trying to step away from the noise and confusion, when she noticed Keanu walking down the hallway with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy around him. He carried the same gentle presence as always, the kind that made people instinctively relax even before he spoke. His footsteps were steady, his shoulders relaxed, and his expression focused. He had clearly noticed the chaos, but he didn't seem shaken by it. Sandra watched him for a moment, feeling a strange relief wash over her just from seeing him. When their eyes finally met, he offered her a soft nod, and she felt the tension inside her loosen slightly. She walked toward him, grateful for a familiar face, even if she wasn't sure how to explain her emotions. He stopped near the doorway, allowing her to approach without rushing her or overwhelming her with questions. She told him quietly that people were confused about the new schedule, and that the sudden changes were causing stress among the crew. He listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. He didn't interrupt her or react dramatically. He simply absorbed her words with the same patience he always had. Then he asked her gently if she was doing okay, in a tone that made the question feel genuine rather than routine. She hesitated, unsure whether to admit the truth or pretend she was fine. But something about his steady presence encouraged honesty. She told him that she felt overwhelmed, not only by the schedule changes, but by the emotional weight she carried from the day before. She didn't go into detail, didn't repeat the hurtful words she had overheard or describe the depth of her exhaustion. She simply said she felt tired, both emotionally and mentally. Keanu nodded slowly, processing her words without judgment. He didn't offer empty encouragement. He didn't minimize her feelings. Instead, he told her something she would remember for many years. He said that being strong didn't mean hiding exhaustion, and that being vulnerable didn't make her weak. His words were simple, spoken softly but with sincerity, and they struck something deep inside her. She realized that he understood more than most people did, not because she had explained everything to him, but because he noticed things that others overlooked. Before she could respond, the assistant director rushed down the hallway, calling actors to gather in the meeting room immediately. The tension returned, and Sandra felt her breath tighten again. Keanu gently placed his hand on her shoulder for a brief moment, a gesture that was warm but respectful, grounding but not invasive. He told her to take a deep breath before walking into the meeting, reminding her that chaos didn't always mean disaster. Sometimes it meant transition. Sometimes it meant opportunity. She held onto those words as they both headed toward the meeting room. The room was filled with uneasy murmurs, restless energy, and frustrated expressions. The assistant director stood at the front, trying to organize his thoughts while flipping through a stack of scribbled notes. He explained the situation in a tense voice, telling the cast and crew that major scenes had to be rescheduled. Some locations had been lost for the week, and the script required revisions to fit the new plan. Sandra watched the exhaustion on his face, the pressure in his shoulders, and she understood that he was trying his best in a difficult situation. Still, the room felt heavy, and people began whispering concerns under their breath. Some actors expressed frustration loudly, complaining about the sudden changes and demanding explanations. Others tried to remain patient, but struggled to hide their disappointment. The energy in the room grew more tense with every minute, and Sandra felt the weight of it pressing against her. She knew that if the atmosphere continued like this, the entire day would collapse under the strain. That was when Keanu stepped forward, not with authority, not with dominance, but with calm clarity. He addressed the assistant director respectfully, asking how the cast could help stabilize the schedule instead of focusing on the problem. He suggested a few adjustments that sounded practical, offering solutions rather than frustration. He didn't dismiss the challenges, but he encouraged the room to shift from panic to collaboration. His tone was so steady, so composed, that people naturally quieted down to listen. The director looked relieved, grateful for someone who brought balance to the room. Others nodded slowly, realizing that maintaining unity was more important than dwelling on mistakes. Sandra watched the scene unfold, feeling a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Once again, he had chosen calm over chaos, respect over tension, unity over ego, and she couldn't deny how deeply it affected her. When the meeting ended and people dispersed, she found herself walking next to him again. She thanked him softly for stepping in, not just for her sake, but for the entire team. He shrugged gently, saying he believed that stressful moments could either divide people or bring them together, and that he preferred the second option. Before she could respond, a sudden sound echoed from the far end of the hallway. A metallic crash, followed by the sharp thud of something heavy hitting the floor. People turned their heads, startled. Sandra felt her heart jolt as she heard a short cry, followed by frantic footsteps. Someone was hurt, and Keanu was already moving toward the noise before anyone else had time to react. Sandra felt her pulse quicken as the metallic crash echoed through the hallway, a sound sharp enough to freeze every conversation around them. Instinctively, she stepped closer to the wall, her breath hitching as another muffled cry followed the noise. Crew members turned their heads in confusion, some startled, some alarmed, and others unsure if they should move or wait for instructions. But Keanu didn't hesitate. He didn't look around for approval or guidance. His body moved before his mind had time to analyze the situation, driven by an instinct that came from a place deeper than thought. Sandra watched him sprint down the hallway, his steps fast but controlled, his posture steady despite the urgency. She felt a jolt of fear mix with a strange admiration, pushing her to follow him even though her legs trembled. She didn't know what awaited them around the corner, but something inside her refused to stay behind. She couldn't explain the instinct, only that it pulled her forward with a force she couldn't ignore. When she reached the end of the hallway, the scene unfolded like a sudden shift in a film, unexpected and heavy. A lighting technician had collapsed near the equipment racks, his body partially pinned beneath a fallen metal stand that had slipped from its support. The stand wasn't enormous, but it was heavy enough to press his shoulder awkwardly against the floor, trapping him in a painful position. Sandra saw the panic in his eyes, the shock on his face, and the way his breath came in quick, uneven gasps. Keanu reached him first, dropping to his knees without hesitation. He placed one hand on the technician's uninjured shoulder, grounding him gently, speaking in a calm voice that sliced through the rising chaos. He asked him if he could move his fingers, if he could feel his arm, if he felt any sharp pain in his neck or legs. His tone remained steady, composed, carrying an almost strange level of focus for someone reacting so quickly. Sandra stood nearby, heart pounding, afraid to move too close and afraid to stay too far. The technician nodded shakily, saying his shoulder hurt badly, but he didn't feel anything broken elsewhere. Keanu listened carefully, his eyes sharp, analyzing the situation with surprising clarity. He looked over his shoulder and called out to two crew members who were frozen in shock, asking them to help him carefully lift the metal stand without adding pressure to the injured man's arm. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to break them out of their daze. They rushed forward, positioning themselves on either side of the fallen equipment. Sandra instinctively took a step back to give them space, her chest tight with worry. Keanu instructed the men on how to lift the stand, guiding them to apply equal force on both sides to avoid sudden shifts. Then, when they were ready, they lifted slowly, raising the metal structure just enough for Keanu to slide his arm beneath the technician's back, stabilizing him as they eased the weight off his shoulder. The technician winced in pain, but he managed to breathe more evenly the moment the pressure lifted. Keanu helped him sit up carefully, supporting his back with both hands. Sandra saw the way he handled the injured man, gentle but firm, careful but confident. There was something deeply human in his actions, something that came from instinct rather than training. He checked the technician's breathing, asked him if he felt dizzy, and waited until color returned to his face before helping him to his feet. When the medic arrived moments later, Keanu stepped aside respectfully, allowing them to take over while still keeping an attentive eye on the situation. The medic thanked him, telling him he had acted quickly and prevented a potential fracture from worsening. Keanu nodded politely, then walked away without waiting for praise or acknowledgement. He didn't act like someone who had done something impressive. He acted like someone who did what needed to be done. Sandra watched him for a long moment, her chest filled with a quiet awe she couldn't put into words. She followed him slowly, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. When she caught up to him near the makeup room, he finally stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment, catching his breath. She asked him softly if he was okay, even though she could see he wasn't physically hurt. He gave her a small smile, telling her he was fine, just a little shaken from the sudden rush of adrenaline. She nodded, her fingers fidgeting at her sides, trying to find the right words. She thanked him in a trembling voice, not just for helping the crew member, but for stepping in so fearlessly, for being the kind of person who ran toward people in trouble instead of away from them. He shook his head gently, telling her that he did what anyone should do, and that stepping in during emergencies wasn't about courage, but about empathy. He said that fear is natural, but letting someone suffer when you can help is something he could never do. His words were simple, but they touched her deeply. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She realized that the trust she felt toward him wasn't based on a single moment. It was growing, layer by layer, built from the way he treated people, the way he carried himself, and the way he chose kindness even when no one was watching. She felt something shift inside her again, something that made her look at him through a new lens, not romantic, not dramatic, but profoundly human. They were interrupted when the assistant director called everyone back to set, announcing that they needed to start shooting immediately to catch up on the lost time. The tension in the air returned, but Sandra felt calmer than before. She followed Keanu to the set, feeling a strange blend of exhaustion and clarity. The next scenes required emotional intensity, and she knew the day would be long. But she also knew she wasn't walking into it alone. The filming began with a complicated action sequence that demanded precise timing and strong focus. Sandra prepared herself mentally as makeup artists made quick adjustments and wardrobe assistants fixed loose threads. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself the way Keanu had suggested earlier. She reminded herself that chaos didn't always mean disaster, that sometimes unexpected moments brought people closer rather than pushing them apart. As the cameras rolled, she stepped into her role, letting the character's emotions guide her movements. Keanu entered the scene moments later, his energy calm but powerful, his performance naturally blending with hers. The two of them moved through the scene with a level of chemistry that the director noticed immediately. Their timing was smooth, their interactions grounded, and their expressions carried a depth that wasn't written in the script but came from something real between them. Between takes, crew members whispered quietly among themselves, noticing how connected Sandra and Keanu seemed, even when they weren't speaking. Some interpreted it as professionalism, others as unspoken understanding. Sandra didn't pay much attention to the whispers. Her focus remained on the scene, though her mind kept returning to the moment she saw him rush toward the injured technician. Hours passed, and the emotional weight of the scenes began to drain her again. By late afternoon, her energy dipped, her shoulders tense, her breathing shallow. She stepped away for a quick break, needing a moment to reset. She found a quiet corner near the back of the soundstage, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. She didn't hear Keanu approach at first. He moved quietly, his footsteps soft enough not to startle her. When he spoke, his voice carried the same gentle warmth she had felt all day. He asked her if she wanted a bottle of water, holding one out with a small nod. She accepted it gratefully, feeling the coolness soothe her dry throat. They stood together in silence for a moment, not awkward, not heavy, just still. Then he asked her something unexpected. He asked her if she ever felt like the expectations around her grew too heavy to carry. She opened her eyes, surprised by the vulnerability in his question. She nodded slowly, telling him that she often felt overwhelmed, not by the work itself, but by the pressure to always appear perfect, strong, unshaken. She told him that the industry loved confidence but often ignored the emotional cost behind it. He listened attentively, his gaze soft. He told her that he understood that sometimes the world expected people to be more than human, forgetting that everyone had limits, fears, and private battles. He told her that the strongest people he knew were not the ones who hid their emotions, but the ones who carried them with honesty. Their conversation grew deeper, more personal, drifting into places neither of them had shared with anyone on set before. They spoke about insecurities, dreams, silent fears, and unspoken pressures. Sandra felt herself opening up in a way she rarely allowed. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt understood. But before she could say something she had been holding inside since the day before, a voice shouted across the stage. A voice that changed the air instantly. A voice calling her name with urgency and panic. She spun around, heart dropping. A producer rushed toward her, breathless, eyes wide with alarm. He told her something had happened. Something serious. Something she never expected. Sandra felt her heart slam against her ribs as the producer approached her in a rush. His footsteps loud against the concrete floor, his breathing uneven as if he had been running across the entire studio. The air around her tightened instantly, every instinct inside her telling her that whatever news he carried was not routine or harmless. Keanu stepped slightly closer without even thinking, his presence steady, grounding her before she even heard a single word. She swallowed hard, bracing herself, hoping the tremor in her chest wouldn't betray the fear rising inside her. The producer stopped right in front of her, bending slightly to catch his breath before speaking. His eyes were wide with worry, his expression tense, and the urgency in his posture made Sandra's stomach drop. He handed her a small device, her phone. She hadn't even realized she had left it in the dressing room earlier, too distracted by the long scenes and the emotional weight of the day. He told her she had several missed calls from her sister, and one message that sounded urgent. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt the world narrow for a moment, everything around her fading except the cold weight of the phone in her hand. She tried to unlock it, but her fingers shook slightly, making the movement clumsy. Keanu noticed, and though he didn't touch her, he stepped closer, offering silent support. She finally managed to open her messages. The text from her sister was short, rushed, filled with the kind of blunt anxiety that only appears when someone is trying not to panic. "Sandy, call me please. It's about Mom." For a moment, Sandra didn't breathe. Her mother had been dealing with health issues for years, nothing life-threatening but serious enough that Sandra always kept a careful eye on updates. But this message felt different, sharp, urgent, unsettling. She felt a tremor move through her chest, her mind racing through every possibility she didn't want to face. She turned away from the producer and Keanu, needing a moment alone just to gather the courage to press call. But Keanu gently placed himself within her peripheral vision, not blocking her, not overwhelming her, just making sure she wasn't alone if something happened. She pressed the call button. Her sister answered immediately. The sound of her voice made Sandra's heart sink even deeper. She sounded worried, breathless, on the edge of tears. She told Sandra that their mother had fainted earlier, unexpectedly, and had been taken to the hospital for observation. She explained that the doctors weren't sure what had caused it yet, and they wanted to run more tests before giving any clear answers. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. She felt guilt rising inside her, guilt for not being there, guilt for being hundreds of miles away filming scenes while her mother was being wheeled into a hospital room. She asked if she should fly home immediately, her voice shaking despite her attempts to steady it. Her sister told her that it wasn't clear yet how serious the situation was, but she thought it would be good for Sandra to come home soon, just in case. The words, "just in case," echoed in her mind, tightening her chest painfully. Those were the words no one wanted to hear, the words that carried too much meaning, the words that could mean everything or nothing at all. When the call ended, Sandra lowered the phone slowly, unable to speak. Her hands trembled, her breath came unevenly, and her thoughts spun in a panic she could not contain. She felt the weight of fear press into her ribs, threatening to collapse her from the inside. Then she heard a quiet voice beside her. "Keanu?" He asked her softly what happened, his tone gentle, steady, without pressure, giving her space to speak when she was ready. She closed her eyes for a long moment, trying to collect the strength to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked as she told him about her mother, the hospital, the uncertainty, the fear she had been holding inside for years. Keanu listened with a stillness that made her chest loosen just enough to breathe. He didn't interrupt or offer cliches or try to comfort her with empty reassurance. He let her speak through the trembling, through the broken breaths, through the tears she tried to hide. When she finished, he placed a hand over hers gently, grounding her with a warmth that made her shoulders shake with silent emotion. He told her to take a moment to breathe, to steady herself, because fear could make even simple decisions feel impossible. He told her that she was not alone, and that whatever she needed to do next, he would help her find the clarity to do it. She felt her body weaken from the emotional weight. She leaned slightly against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her elbows on her knees, her face buried in her hands. She didn't sob loudly. She didn't collapse dramatically. She just let the quiet tears fall, the kind of tears that come from deep concern rather than panic. Keanu crouched next to her, close enough for her to know she wasn't abandoned, but far enough to respect her space. He stayed there in silence, giving her time to gather herself, She felt grateful for his presence, grateful for his patience, grateful for the calm he carried even in moments that felt unbearable. When she finally lifted her head, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers, he asked her what she wanted to do. She told him she didn't know. She told him she felt torn, afraid to leave the set in the middle of chaos, afraid to stay while her mother needed her. She told him she feared being judged for walking away, feared disappointing the team, feared appearing unprofessional, even though her heart screamed for her to go home. Keanu looked at her with the same quiet intensity she had noticed before. He told her something she didn't expect, something that cut through her fears with clarity. He said that no film, no job, no schedule, no production would ever be more important than family. He said that the people who mattered would understand, and the ones who didn't weren't her responsibility. He told her that life had moments that demanded presence, and this was one of them. His words shook something loose inside her, something she didn't realize she had been holding tightly for years. The pressure to always be strong, always be professional, always be dependable, even when her heart was breaking, had kept her trapped in expectations she didn't fully agree with. But hearing someone she respected tell her that it was okay to prioritize herself and her family made her chest lift with a sense of freedom she desperately needed. But there was still a problem. The production was already unstable. Schedules had collapsed. Scenes were behind. The tension among the crew had grown heavier by the hour. If she left now, everything would fall further apart. And she knew it. She stood slowly, steadying herself with the wall. Keanu rose beside her, watching her carefully. She walked back toward the main set with him at her side, trying to find the assistant director in the crowd. When she finally found him, he looked exhausted, overwhelmed, pulled in too many directions at once. When she told him what happened, he listened with an expression that softened instantly. He apologized for the stress, told her he understood, and said they would manage without her until she returned. He told her to go not as an obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. She felt relief wash over her. But then another voice cut through the air. A voice from behind the set walls. A voice angry, commanding, and loud enough to silence the entire room. The lead producer. He demanded to know why she was leaving. He demanded to know why the schedule would fall even further behind. He demanded to know why she couldn't wait one more day. The room fell silent. Sandra felt her stomach twist, and Keanu stepped forward before she could say a word. The lead producer's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, stopping every conversation on set and sending a heavy silence rolling across the soundstage. Sandra felt her skin prickle, her chest tighten, and her breath shorten all at once. The tension in the room shifted instantly, no longer scattered and chaotic, but pulled into a single heated point that centered right on her. The eyes of dozens of people turned toward her with a mix of concern, curiosity, and quiet fear, knowing the producer was not someone easily challenged. He stepped forward in fast, angry strides, his expression tight with pressure and frustration that had been boiling since the previous night's failed meeting. He pointed at the assistant director first, demanding an explanation, his voice rising with each word. He accused the team of falling behind, losing control, and making emotional decisions during a critical phase of filming. Then his gaze snapped to Sandra, sharp and unyielding, and she felt her stomach twist painfully. He asked her why she thought she could walk away now, at the worst possible moment for the production. He told her that everyone on set was dealing with stress, and that personal issues could not override the needs of an entire team. The words struck deeply, not because they were true, but because they were spoken with a coldness that ignored her fear, her pain, her humanity. Sandra felt her throat tighten with emotion she tried to swallow. She wanted to speak, to explain gently, to stay calm, but the intensity of his tone made her feel small, as if her grief had to fight for permission to exist. Her hands trembled slightly, hidden at her sides, and for a moment she doubted herself again, doubted whether she truly had the right to leave, doubted whether she was being selfish or unprofessional. Keanu stood beside her in silence, observing the moment with a stillness that almost felt unnatural. He listened to every word, watched the producer's expression, and noticed the way Sandra subtly shrunk inward at the pressure. Something changed in his posture then. He straightened, his shoulders lifting, his jaw setting, and a quiet intensity settled in his eyes, an intensity Sandra had never seen before. Before she could respond, Keanu stepped forward. The room held its breath. He spoke calmly, without aggression, without anger, without raising his voice. but his words carried a weight that made the producer's rant fall flat instantly. He told the producer that Sandra had every right to leave because family emergencies were not optional, not negotiable, and not something anyone should be shamed for. He said that the production's problems were not Sandra's responsibility to carry alone, nor was it acceptable to treat her as if her mother's condition was an inconvenience. The producer scoffed, trying to push back, insisting that everyone had a job to do and that the film could fall apart if actors walked out whenever they wanted. Keanu didn't flinch. He told him that compassion did not weaken a team. A lack of compassion did. He reminded him that filmmaking was collaborative, that respect was essential, and that pressuring someone during a family crisis was not leadership but manipulation. The entire room stayed frozen. Sandra felt an unexpected rush of emotion swell inside her, not just gratitude, but something deeper, heavier, almost overwhelming. She had seen Keanu's kindness in quiet moments, felt his empathy, witnessed his calm during chaos. But here, in front of an entire crew and a furious producer, he chose to stand beside her not timidly, not carefully, but boldly with unwavering commitment. The producer's face tightened with frustration. He stepped closer to Keanu, lowering his voice into something sharper, accusing him of overstepping, of interfering, of creating conflict where none was needed. But Keanu stayed rooted, unshaken, his calmness becoming a shield that absorbed the producer's hostility. He said that boundaries mattered, that people mattered, and that no production should demand someone choose between their career and their family. Sandra watched him with wide eyes, unable to speak, her breath locked in her throat. No one had ever defended her like that in her entire career, not with such sincerity, not with such strength, not with such quiet courage. His words wrapped around her like a protective embrace she didn't expect, a reminder that she was not alone, that her fear didn't have to silence her, that her heart didn't have to fight its battles without help. The assistant director stepped forward hesitantly, supporting Keanu's point, telling the producer that the team would reorganize scenes without Sandra for a few days. Another crew member chimed in, saying they could shoot set pieces or secondary shots while she was gone. Slowly, voices from around the room added to the discussion, each one encouraging a shift away from the producer's rigid stance. The producer realized the room was no longer on his side. His anger softened into reluctant acceptance, though the frustration in his eyes remained. He turned back to Sandra, his tone cooling but still stern, telling her to go take care of her family but to return as soon as possible. Sandra nodded stiffly, feeling both relief and tension still trapped inside her. She didn't appreciate the coldness, but she didn't have the energy to argue. When the producer walked away, the tension that gripped the room dissolved slowly, like smoke fading into the air. People resumed their tasks cautiously, glancing at Sandra with sympathetic eyes. Some nodded at her as she passed, offering quiet, unspoken support. But Sandra's focus remained fixed on the man standing next to her. Keanu. Once they stepped away from the crowd, Sandra finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. Her chest loosened, her throat softened, and her eyes burned with unspoken emotion. She turned to face him, trying to find the words that matched the weight of what he had done for her, but they refused to form. She felt tears rise again, not from fear this time, but from being defended, respected, protected in a way she had rarely experienced. Keanu noticed the emotion in her eyes and stepped slightly closer, his expression softening. He told her gently that she didn't need to thank him, that he only said what was right, what was fair, what any decent person should say. But Sandra shook her head, her voice trembling as she told him that what he did went far beyond kindness. She told him that it meant more than he would ever understand, that his support gave her courage she didn't know she had inside her. He looked at her with a warmth that reached deeper than his words. He told her that she deserved to feel safe, deserved to feel understood, and deserved to be treated with humanity even during chaos. He told her that she didn't have to face everything alone, not when people who cared about her were right beside her. She felt something inside her break open then, not in a painful way, but in a freeing way, like a door she had kept locked for years finally letting light in. She wanted to tell him how much she trusted him now, how deeply she appreciated him, how his actions had changed the way she saw him. But her voice failed her. Before she could gather herself, someone called out that her car was waiting to take her to the airport. She inhaled sharply, realizing the urgency of the moment again. She turned to leave, gripping her bag, ready to walk toward the exit, but Keanu touched her arm lightly. She stopped instantly. He told her to wait for a second. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if the next thing he wanted to say carried weight. He told her that he would check in on her mother every day, even from afar. He told her that he wanted her to call him if she needed anything, anything at all. He looked at her with eyes so sincere it made her chest ache. And then he stepped closer, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He told her something that made her breath catch. He told her that he didn't want her to face the next few days without someone who cared. Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words vanished. Then he said something even more unexpected. Something that made the world around her pause. He said he would come to her city tomorrow if she needed him there. Not as a co-star, not as a colleague, but as someone she trusted. Someone she mattered to. She stared at him, stunned, shaken, moved in a way she didn't know how to express. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated violently in her hand. A call from the hospital. The doctor wanted to speak with her urgently. Her heart dropped. She answered with trembling fingers, and the expression on her face changed so suddenly that Keanu stepped forward instantly, his eyes darkening with worry. The doctor's words struck her like a blow. Her mother's condition had worsened, and they needed Sandra to arrive as soon as possible. Sandra felt her breath crumble inside her chest as the doctor's voice traveled through the phone, each word heavy, each detail sharper than the last. She listened silently, her fingers trembling around the device, her eyes fixed on the floor though she barely saw anything in front of her. Her mother's condition had changed, the doctor said. The fainting had not been a simple collapse, but a sign of a deeper problem the scans had just revealed. They needed her to come immediately, because decisions might have to be made soon, and her mother needed family close. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, unsteady, unreal, as if someone had taken the ground from beneath her feet. She felt a wave of fear she could neither contain nor understand fully. Everything inside her tightened, twisted, pressed against her chest until she could barely breathe. She wanted to speak, but air refused to move through her throat, caught in a painful stillness. Keanu watched her closely, noticing the change in her expression, the way her hands trembled, the way her shoulders sank under the weight of invisible pain. He stepped closer cautiously, giving her space yet staying near enough to hold her steady if she needed it. When she finally lowered the phone, her eyes filled with a quiet devastation he had never seen in her before. She told him in a broken whisper that the doctors were worried, that her mother's health had taken a turn, that she had to leave now. Her voice cracked beneath the weight of fear, and for a moment she felt like a fragile version of herself, stripped of the composure she usually carried so naturally. Keanu didn't let her stand alone in that moment. He didn't try to comfort her with false positivity or quick promises. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her gently, holding her with a tenderness that felt warm, grounding, and deeply human. Sandra let herself lean into his embrace, her forehead resting against his chest, her breathing unsteady. She allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to let the fear pour out of her in quiet tears she didn't try to hide. He whispered softly that she would get through this, that she wasn't alone, that he was right there with her no matter what. He told her to breathe slowly, to focus on one step at a time, to trust that she would be strong enough to face whatever waited for her on the other side of that plane ride. She pulled away slowly, wiping her tears, grateful for his presence but overwhelmed by everything happening at once. She grabbed her things and walked toward the exit, her movements shaky but determined. She didn't turn around, afraid that if she saw him again before leaving, she would break completely. But Keanu followed a few steps behind, not to stop her, not to question her, but to make sure she reached the car safely. When they reached the parking lot, her driver opened the door, her bag already loaded. She took a deep breath, preparing herself mentally for the long flight ahead. Keanu stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his expression soft but serious. She finally turned to him, her eyes heavy with emotion, unsure of what to say. He spoke before she could try. He told her that she was doing the right thing. That family mattered more than any schedule or scene, that she had nothing to feel guilty about, that he would handle whatever happened on set until she returned, and that she should call him the moment she landed. She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat still ached with fear, but his words settled inside her like an anchor. She stepped forward and hugged him again, tightly this time, as if some part of her needed to carry his strength with her. He hugged her back gently, steadying her breath without saying a word. When she finally let go, she stepped into the car and closed the door slowly, her heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. As the car pulled away, she looked back once through the window. Keanu stood there watching, hands still in his pockets, posture steady, a soft determination in his eyes that stayed with her until he faded from view. The drive to the airport felt endless. The flight felt even longer. She stared out the window for hours, her mind replaying the doctor's words, her sister's voice, her mother's smile, and Keanu's quiet strength. She didn't sleep. She didn't distract herself. She let the fear sit inside her because it was too heavy to push away. When she landed and rushed to the hospital, her sister met her in the lobby with tired eyes and a relieved embrace. They walked together to their mother's room, their steps slow and quiet. Sandra's stomach twisted as she approached the door, afraid of what she would see, afraid of what she would feel, afraid of the truth waiting on the other side. But when she stepped inside, something in her heart softened. Her mother was awake. Weak, pale, fragile, but awake. Her breath caught, relief pouring through her like warm rainfall after a long storm. She rushed to her bedside, holding her mother's hand gently, tears slipping down her cheeks as her mother smiled softly at her. They talked quietly for a long time, about memories, about love, about life, about the things that really mattered. The fear didn't disappear, but the warmth in her mother's eyes eased the sharp edges of uncertainty. For hours she stayed there, refusing to leave her side. She held her mother's hand through every test, every update, every pause in conversation. She realized how much she had carried inside without noticing, how much she missed her mother, how deeply she needed this moment of closeness. She understood suddenly why she had felt so fragile the day before. The exhaustion she'd been fighting came from more than work. It came from the emotional distance she had forced between herself and the people she loved. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and her mother drifted into sleep, her phone buzzed quietly. She stepped into the hallway to answer it. It was Keanu. He asked her how she was, how her mother was, whether the doctors had any news. She told him everything, her fear, her relief, her exhaustion. He listened with the same patience and empathy he had shown on set. He told her that he had spoken to the director, that the schedule had been reorganized successfully, that the tension had settled. He told her that she should stay as long as she needed without guilt. She asked him why he was doing so much for her. His answer was simple. He told her that some people carry storms quietly, and he didn't want her carrying hers alone. His words traveled through her like a warm light, filling the empty places she had ignored for too long. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, letting the moment settle into her heart. They talked until her exhaustion became too heavy. Before they hung up, he told her something that left her breathless. He told her that she had inspired him long before she ever knew it. That her strength had changed him. That her kindness had taught him something. She didn't know what to say. She only knew that something between them had shifted into a deeper truth, a truth she would carry with her forever. The next morning, when her mother's condition improved slightly, the doctor reassured them that she would likely recover with rest and careful monitoring. Sandra felt her entire body release tension she didn't realize she had been holding. The relief was overwhelming. Later that afternoon, as she sat beside her mother, her phone buzzed again. A message from Keanu. Checking in, how are you holding up today? She smiled softly. In the quiet hospital room, beside the woman who raised her, Sandra understood something she had never fully recognized before. Trust wasn't built from fame, or moments in the spotlight, or public admiration. Trust was built from small acts of humanity. From the way someone stood beside you when the world pressed too hard. From the way someone listened. From the way someone stayed. When she returned to set days later, still tired but emotionally lighter, the crew welcomed her back gently. The tension from before had faded, replaced by a calm she didn't expect. As she walked through the hallway toward the main stage, she saw Keanu waiting, leaning against a piece of equipment with that familiar, quiet smile. When their eyes met, everything she felt during those difficult days rose inside her again. Gratitude, respect, trust, and something warmer she wasn't ready to name. She walked toward him slowly. He stepped forward with the same gentle presence he always had. And when she reached him, she didn't speak at first. She just hugged him. A long, grateful, grounding embrace. He held her gently, his hand resting at her back, steady and warm. When they finally pulled apart, she looked up at him and whispered something she had carried inside since the moment he defended her in front of everyone. She told him that he was the real reason she never felt alone on set. The real reason she felt safe. The real reason she trusted him without question. And he smiled, a soft, sincere, almost shy smile, and told her that he was honored to be someone she trusted. Years later, when Sandra finally revealed this story to the world, she didn't share every detail, only the truth that mattered most. That kindness is more powerful than fame. That respect builds deeper bonds than glamour. And that Keanu Reeves had changed her life. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet humanity that stayed with her long after the cameras stopped rolling.